Ladies and gentlemen, I'm standing here so that everybody has to look back over your shoulders to the back of the conference hall. Look over your shoulders to the back of the conference hall. There is a photo booth specially designed so all of you during the tea and lunch breaks can go and take your pictures. We have ushers who will help you to stand behind the frame and get a picture taken. Also, behind your right shoulders, you can see the 3D printing shop. Again, this is something different. Some of you might have to stand up and take a look. So it's over your right shoulder, there is a 3D printing shop. And it's one of the exciting features of this conference. You can have a custom designed 3D object manufactured right in front of you. So the idea with the drone camera, with the 3D printing, with manless entry registration, the idea is for you to embrace technology, to connect with it, to accept it and start thinking it as part of your business dynamics and business organization. Because the fastest growing product in the world is not something that most of you use. I can guarantee it. It's called Snapchat. And the future generation is using it, millions and millions of them. Half of you, including me, I don't even know how to use it. I've tried it so many times, it's extremely complicated. But you have to supposedly have HD, hyper attention deficit disorder, HDAD, to really understand what this does for you. So enjoy, walk around, take a picture taken, and get a selfie taken. And upload it. And upload it where? On our Facebook page. You can see the address, which is ICAP Conference. We have a Facebook page. Like it, engage, share, comment, take a picture, and upload. Also, the Twitter account has CFO Conference. That's the handle of the Twitter account. Other exciting things about the conference are the speakers. We have an interactive case study lineup, which will talk about how the VUCA world is changing the function within and without. Also, the first keynote speaker that I will invite shortly is a very prominent speaker, and he will talk about geopolitics and how the finance function will be adapting to it in the future. Dr. Jeffrey Stacy is our next speaker. He is a business consultant, executive, international consultant, author, and he has worked in government, academia, and the private sector. He is the managing partner of Geopolicity, which is a consulting firm based in the US. His clients include the United States Defense Department, the United States State Department, USAID, NATO, the United Nations, the European Union, the Asian Development Bank, and many corporate clients. He will be speaking on geopolitical, economic, and trade futures. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Dr. Jeffrey Stacy.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning here at this very prestigious conference. I understand by reputation that this is not only one of the most important business conferences in Pakistan, but indeed in the entire region. So I want to thank the honored guests, colleagues, and new friends in ICAP for this invitation to address you all this morning. And at a pivotal time in the development of this country, this city, this region, and indeed the world, as your president has already described to you and outlined a bit, I'm going to just try to expand on that a little this morning. If we get started, I've chosen a controversial title and theme for my talk today. It seems a little bit over the top, doesn't it? Economics trumps politics. This is something that was predicted some time ago. It has become a cliche. It seemingly has been discredited, and yet I'm going to assert this morning to all of you, and I expect you to come after me in the Q&A afterwards, that there is yet some validity to this theme. I'm going to make this argument today. Pakistan and the New Silk Road is sort of the sub-theme of my talk today. It will have four components: a rapidly changing world in which there are four distinct megatrends that I was going to say need to pay attention to, but in fact, they will demand attention all on their own with no help from ourselves. The geostrategic landscape is going to be incredibly important for everything that people in this room and those in your network will be doing in future years. The emerging economic corridors are an extremely hot topic. They are really the essence of the evidence that I'm going to present to you in terms of my argument about economics trumping politics, and then we'll look finally at how Pakistan stands to gain from this. Before I jump into the mega trends this morning, I'd like to talk about a certain country that is becoming accustomed to dealing with some deeply set problems. If you look out on the economic frontier, you've got significant problems. If you look at the political frontier, you've got significant problems. If you look at the security frontier of this country, you've got significant problems. And, well, which country is this? Does it sound like it could be a country in the Central South Asia region? In fact, I present to you that it is the country I left 2 days ago, the ununited States of America. Basically, in the United States, we have such a set of complex problems, a sort of VUCA for the USA, if you will, operating at present, that in fact, what is the number one question that I've been asked since I've gotten here? And that is Donald Trump going to win your election? And should we take him seriously? In other words, are we to believe the things that he says? And I don't have an answer to that question that I think is satisfying to myself or will be to any of you. I am among, must be tens of thousands of analysts who did not see this coming, did not see the rise of Trump, the persistent ability of his political staying power, if you will, and the fact that he is now poised as the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party to challenge for the presidency of the United States, which is supposedly, rumor has it, one of the more powerful countries in the world. Well, we shall see. I really don't have a prediction for you on that because I've been wrong already several times over with regard to this incredible phenomenon. But I can tell you this, and these are some things that I know some of you know because you've been talking to me about them since I arrived. It's been a pretty entertaining race, this presidential race in America. One of the most entertaining in sheer entertainment and even humor terms that we've had in a very long time. In fact, I sort of miss one of the other infamous Republican candidates, Senator Ted Cruz. I sort of liked the song and dance act that he and Mr. Trump had. I sort of thought of them as Crump. And I miss Crump very much because already now that there is no longer the C there and we are now talking about Mr. Trump, all of a sudden the jokes are over and people are taking his ascendance very seriously indeed. In fact, his ascendance is deeply worrisome to the entire range of U.S. friends and allies, and that includes Pakistan. It is not a surprise. I published an article in Foreign Affairs just a few weeks ago where they asked me to compare the foreign policy doctrines of President Obama, of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And analyzing the Trump doctrine was pretty challenging because it is laden with internal inconsistencies and contradictions. So things are quite serious. For example, he advocated in his most serious political speech to date, where he actually spoke from a teleprompter for the first time in his career and the first time in this campaign. He actually said that he was going to ensure global peace at the same time that he was going to defeat ISIS, build the greatest military in the world, and then disengage from almost all global commitments that the U.S. has in a serious way. So it's gotten from the comical to the serious pretty quickly. But if I'm going to stay consistent with my theme this morning, economics trumping politics, well, I guess there's an unintended pun right there. Economics takes precedence, in my view, over politics. But the only person that can out-Trump Trump himself is probably Trump. In any case, there's one clue I think that sharp analysts have gotten about him. It is that as he's gotten closer to the nomination, in fact, he started to moderate his statements. He doesn't have a track record. He's never run for or won political office or held it. But in fact, as I predict in this foreign affairs piece of mine, his advisors, and probably he himself, were he to become president of the United States of America, would probably not do almost the entire list of incendiary things that he's described in recent weeks and months. We will see. I've been wrong before. But let me move on to a quick disclaimer that although I once worked for the U.S. government, that really to me is ancient history. Now in my mid-40s, see, that was back in my mid-30s, so that's a long time ago. I do not speak for or represent the United States government in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, my kind introducer should have mentioned, or could have mentioned, that if you were to give a longer list of the clients of myself as an individual consultant or my firm Geopolicity, in fact, there are numerous governments, think tanks, and business firms, and many of them are right here in this region, that I think of as Central South Asia. I've been told that that's not an actual term. Mr. Stacy, there is Central Asia and there is South Asia, but I think that we can get in the business of starting some trends here at this conference. We have VUCA, so I present CSA to you, Central South Asia. Implicit in that is my view that this region is integrating, not disintegrating, and it's more useful to think of it perhaps in that way. Okay. Well, Geopolicity, we have clients who are based in Dubai. I myself am based in Washington, but we do a whole range of work, in particular on the business, economic, finance side, although we do work on the security side as well. On the security side, one of the developing trends, if you're doing security sector reform in a given country, I'll be doing something like this in Somalia before long. In fact, it is the financial and accounting elements of security sector reform that is the most challenging these days. But we do everything from help a country emerging from civil war to develop basic taxation, to doing basic budgeting, moving on to new business development, and all the way to attracting investors for infrastructure projects and a range of similar things. If we stay agile at Geopolicity, if we stay smart, if we do good work for our clients, then we, as I think you all do, will have to take account of at least 4 mega trends that I'd like to outline for you today. In a world benefiting from 3D printers, from robotics, e-commerce, mobile banking, civilian drones, such as the one that's flying around this conference today, I'd actually like to focus on 4 mega trends that bode well for the precedence of economics over politics. How do you know a mega trend when you see one? I mean, there are lots of trends out there. Think about that for a second. I will submit to you that a mega trend is a trend that if you, any of you, or I, were to get a lot of extra political power and resources compared to what we have today, we couldn't change a mega trend. These things are going to happen whether we like it or we don't like it. They're coming down the pike, as it were, and most of them are incredibly positive and fit with the agenda of this conference. The first is the growth of the middle class. There will be over 2.2 billion new middle-class consumers by 2020. In a time when we've got a lot of concern over low growth, low demand, low prices of commodities, this number is 1,000 times larger than when there was the Industrial Revolution in this world. It is historically unprecedented. The demand for goods, services, agricultural products, extracted products is going to be highly significant because of this. And it's important to keep in mind because right now we really are at the downside of the super cycle of commodity prices and production. The upside is coming, in other words. Secondly, technological innovation and or digital disruption is accelerating very fast. Analysis predicts that 40% of the typical work that a worker does in any corporation will, within 10 years, be automated. This seems a little scary, but in fact, the upside of this, if you think about it, literally everything that we do at our workplace and in our home, there is an innovator out there, or a disruptor, or whole hordes of them who are trying to make them better, cheaper, faster, more pleasant, or more beneficial to our health. It is literally in every element that we do. Part of this is the cascading power of computers, obviously. Here we're talking about Moore's Law. Nothing different from the standard definition that we're all familiar with, the power of machines to process information and analyze complex problems in a shorter period of time. We are actually going to, by 2023, have a computer that is as powerful and can mimic the decision-making of a human brain by 2023. That is going to have profound implications on the work that we do and the way that we live our lives. The other part of this is the data explosion. Again, something that isn't surprising to us, but we are able to store more real-time data than we ever have been able to before. In fact, every 2 days, the entire human race collects more information than it did in the previous 2,000 years combined. Every 2 days. It is an extraordinary rate of acceleration. Number 3, I'd like to talk about the aging of the global population. This cuts positive and obviously a little negative. By 2025, the population over the age of 65 is going to double. We are going to have the first time in human history that we have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 14. We're seeing this already in places like Japan, Korea, Italy. It's coming to a lot of Western societies sooner than it is to a lot of Eastern societies and global South countries. In fact, it's a drag on growth. 2% of GDP growth annually is going to be the drag of this for countries with aging populations. Pakistan is not one of them. Countries that are lucky enough to have a young population, assuming that they educate and train them well, are actually going to have an economic headwind because of this and not a tailwind. The fourth is the cascading interconnectedness of this world that is directly fueling GDP growth. It's an astounding figure. 4.2 billion humans are now connected. We see evidence, again, not a surprise, that countries that are more connected to the world through trade, through capital flows, and via data accumulation are going to get more GDP growth, have higher wages, have more significant, mature, shared development than those that are isolated. It is a very significant multiplier effect on growth. So much for the mega trends. Now let's look at something a little different, and that is the great inhibitor of mega trends, geopolitics. Here we have geopolitical instability as literally the number one threat to global growth today. It will be ignored at one's peril. Now, Pakistan has been able to thrive and drive forward, especially in the last 5 years, in the midst of a very tense region of the world. This has changed significantly in the last 5 years, and we see that in this very city here, Karachi, the economic dynamo of the Pakistan economy. The trend lines here look positive as well. The rest isn't looking so positive, is it? I've already alluded to the domestic sideshow in the U.S. that is alarming allies around the world. Russia, it's pretty clear to just about everyone now, its reemergence as not necessarily a global superpower, but certainly a regional power with a lot of effect on global dynamics, has reemerged not in a benign way, but in a malign way. We've seen this in Ukraine, we've seen this in Syria, a number of other places, yet Russia too has economic interests that I will argue eventually will take precedence over political ones. China, they would be the elephant in the room if we didn't mention them, wouldn't they? China used to have a grand strategy, in other words, a foreign policy doctrine that it is adhering to for a whole series of leaders that they referred to as peaceful rise. Under the current leader, that has changed. China now has a newfound aggressive stance in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. But again, in China, we see some economic trends that are going to be challenging some political trends. The European eclipse. Who would have thought that Europe would have such a long and profound financial crisis? That would be compounded by an economic crisis now compounded by a refugee crisis. In fact, that has a lot to do with Russia and the literal weaponization of refugees coming from the Syria conflict. It didn't really all have to be this way. For example, Russia also does some positive things. For example, it helped with the negotiations on the Iran nuclear agreement. China is, and I will detail this some more in a minute, investing not just in Pakistan, but all over the CSA region. Europe, it has, in some ways, been an open, welcoming door for these refugees, and in particular in Germany and with Chancellor Angela Merkel and her party. But look what the EU short-sighted politicians have done to first Cyprus a few years ago and more recently to Greece. If they were thinking like people in this room, I bet they would have done it differently. Instead of focusing on austerity and really literally forcing austerity down Greece's throat, as it did just again with another round of aid last week. Instead, the EU and the IMF could have focused on structural changes, such as opening up the pharmaceutical sector to greater competition, instead of direct, immediate austerity. They've done this at a time when Western allies, the EU and NATO, have had problems with Turkey and Cyprus, which is very close to Greece, of course, in getting along. Indeed, in Cyprus, before Germany and other EU member states did the same thing to Cyprus, you had the arrival in President Anastasiades of the first Cypriot leader who was willing to do global strategic business with the rest of its allies in a long time. And instead, that country again had austerity forced on it. But, getting back to my theme, the IMF now has done a giant mega culpa on this. It has turned around its view on austerity. And in fact, we saw this in the dynamics with the EU and Greece just last week. Germany now has agreed that within 2 years, the EU will join the IMF and engage in debt relief for Greece. It is long overdue, especially as Greece has shouldered the brunt force of the refugee crisis in the region. And now to the topics that everyone loves: Syria, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the instability in this region. We all know it well. I don't have to go into chapter and verse on the details of all of this, but again, it didn't have to be this way. Even without allowing economics to take precedence over politics, even getting the geopolitics on this right would have turned around the war in Syria. Sometimes, to create a market which is always organized by a set of rules, you always must have political stability in place first. Political stability every once in a while requires one power or other actually using force. There was a time 2.5 years ago, we were all there in Washington, and we thought by the weekend we were going to war with Britain and France in Syria. The costs of that decision to allies all across this region, particularly in the Middle East and particularly in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf-based countries in the GCC, was immense, and in political terms, hard even to fully calculate. Pulling back just 4 hours before French Mirage fighters began their bombing sorties was a geopolitically cataclysmic decision. There was no ISIS at this time. There wasn't even an al-Nusra front. In fact, the Free Syrian Army, which is hardly in place today, with the removal of 2 Syrian federal airfields, the Free Syrian Army alone, without Western troop intervention, could have been would have been militarily successful. Had that been followed with the largest UN peacekeeping force in history, and why would Russia and China agree to do that? Because of course they wanted Western allies to stop waging military conflict. You would see a much different Syria and region indeed than we see today. Economics will trump politics, but sometimes we need the politics to get it right and stop delaying this takeover over time. The instability around here is all too, well, not just clear to us, it's in the very theme of this conference. But that too will take its course, and I'll allude to that some more towards the end. But if we think about the new Silk Road that is being constructed, let's switch over to the positive. The activities of Russia, China, Iran, and numerous other countries, including the U.S., are very positive and bode well in this regard. You all know CPEC better than anybody in the world. What you don't know is how positively this is going to affect Pakistan. The $46 billion for this economic corridor linking Gwadar to northwest China isn't easy to calculate, but it will be very catalytic indeed. In fact, for the whole region. And this gets to another part of my theme on getting the geopolitics right in order so that the economics can take over. If we look at the Chabahar-Garland Highway corridor, and we saw some activity on this just in the last week, the announcement of India's $500 billion investment for the port, and then the transit agreement signed by Afghanistan, India, and Iran. This, too, is an opportunity for Pakistan. Moving on to the energy needs of South Asia and this country, CASA 1000 and TAPI are finally moving forward. TAPI is inaugurated and the implementation is underway. CASA 1000 has actually had construction begin and the deals are being signed with the companies involved. New trade routes are opening, multiple overlapping trade routes. In particular, if we think about rail traffic and commerce between China and Europe, it has more than doubled in the last year. In fact, China's trade with Europe has gone from 1.8 billion in 2000 to over 50 billion in 2013. Most overland trade from Europe to China is going by the so-called northern routes through Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. More than 1,000 trains took this journey last year. They transported over 50,000 containers, a 40-fold increase just from 2011. Now, this route is so attractive, especially to electronics companies, because of the shorter transit time compared to shipping by sea. The journey actually takes 13 to 16 days, and the cost is on average $9,000 a container. In fact, shipping by sea is almost twice the cost. Well, I got that wrong. There's a key nuance here. This cost is more than twice the cost of shipping by sea. But the catch is the efficiency in the shorter time, the reduced cost of financing inventory, cheaper by air and faster than sea. Now, China alone is constructing a bunch of mini corridors all by itself. You've got the Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway that a Chinese consortium is going to be building. The amounts of investment, 17 billion. Then you've got the Khargos-Aktua Railway. From Khargos all the way to Aktua, this scheme involves 450 miles of rail and is a 2.7 billion Kazakh project. The Central Asia-China pipeline for gas runs from the Turkmenistan-Uzbekistan border to Xinjiang in China. Investment costs $7.3 billion. The Central Asia Gas Pipeline, Line D. China signed agreements with Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan to build a fourth line. This is coming in just a few years, and it will export capacity to China from 55 billion CU per year to 85 billion. Then you've got the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway. The Kyrgyz leg of this has been delayed, but has finally now begun this year. Finally, the Khargos Gateway, one of my favorite topics, multimodal inland ports or dry ports. This one on the China-Kazakh border is already in place. It's going to be one of the key hubs of this new Silk Road. It began operations in August. China's Jiangsu province is going to be investing over $600 million in its development. China, economically, you can see the evidence. The economics is taking precedence over the politics. Now, finally, we jump to the opportunities for Pakistan. And They are significant. One of you made this very phrase to me yesterday at dinner: we've got to make the most of CPEC. That's absolutely right. One way to do it is by developing Gwadar in full, not as a competitor to Karachi, but in complement to Karachi. Thinking seriously about becoming a full-fledged comprehensive link to Central Asia. This can be done, including via Afghanistan in several specific ways. Implementation of the AFPAC trade agreement, APTA, is important. It's been signed, but it's not been fully implemented. We still have trucks going to the border, unloading, and then reloading on the other side of the border and going the rest of the way. That is a massive non-tariff impediment to trade and rising incomes. Even more importantly, I present to you building a spur from the One Belt, One Road infrastructure corridor from Gwadar to Islamabad, building a spur, both a rail and road spur to Kandahar. If we think about this, what we have here is an incredible engine for growth, in particular in one of the most volatile regions. By generating competition with Chabahar, driving down prices in both ports, all CSA countries and their citizens will win. This will be to the benefit, yes, of Afghanistan, also of Pakistan, and also the other countries in the region. Indeed, the acid test for finishing the job here in this element of the New Silk Road would be for a truck to be able to come from the border of Turkmenistan and go the shortest possible route across Afghanistan to Pakistan, and that there'd be a complementary rail spur for this as well. Energy. Central Asia has it, South Asia needs it. These links are happening. I've talked about the evidence already. There's also serious potential for Pakistan through Afghanistan hydro plants. But then we had to get to India. Pakistan and India, this relationship, as it evolves, as it changes, because it needs to change, the benefits for Indians and Pakistanis and quite a significant set of populations in between these two countries is very significant indeed. It is time for Pakistan to begin trading with India and India to begin trading with Pakistan. If economics is going to trump politics, take precedence over politics, it's going to take some hard work, but maybe this too, even this too, is a mega trend. Remember that definition. Maybe it is unstoppable. Francis Fukuyama and his end of history argument, many people, it's now conventional wisdom, who think he was wrong. I think, in fact, he was partially right. Only the arc of history and development is longer than he expected, and it is not in a straight line. In fact, it is bent. But stability will take precedence over war, economics over politics. It just tends to take a little longer than most people predict. Economic innovators, the people here at this conference, are the future compared to political leaders, military leaders, and intelligence leaders. It was John F. Kennedy who said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And certainly this was in reference to economic growth and the lower and bottom classes, not just the middle class, but what's beneath that, benefits as well. In fact, eventually, it is my view that the political power brokers will get it, and they will give way to you, the economic power brokers. Why will they do this? They'll be getting rich. Eventually, they will realize that they too will be materially and personally better off, just as they allow others to by stepping aside and handing the torch to the economic innovators. I'd like to compliment your Prime Minister, who's doing the very same right at this time, because you know what he's really up to. He's on a strategic mission to make sure that the UK stays in the EU. This isn't in the papers yet. But humor aside, that helps me make my point. I would like to congratulate all of you and also Pakistan, because I firmly believe it is poised to be in the vanguard of CSA becoming, within 10 or maybe 15 years, just as McKinsey has predicted, the new global epicenter of economic growth. I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. I hope my company will do business with some of your companies. Together we can do this work and keep moving, all while we wait for those political folks to realize that they need to put down the things in their hands and join us on the journey that we are taking. Thank you very much.